Hello, today we will be applying biomechanics concepts to the sport of curling. So before we apply biomechanics, we'll first briefly review what curling is and how it all started. So curling is a sport where two teams of 4 people take turns throwing 44-pound stones down a sheet of ice. The target is a 12-foot house, aka the bullseye, roughly 150 feet away. Each team throws 8 rocks per round for a total of 6 to 10 rounds. Stones are delivered with a predetermined rotation, so they actually curl as they travel down the ice, hence the name curling. A team captain, called the skip, calls the shots and the other players brush the ice in front of the stone, which can drastically affect the speed and direction of the shot. The goal of the game is to get as many of your stones closer to the center of the bullseye than your opponent. The team closest to the center after all 8 rocks are thrown scores the points for the given round. The team with the most points after all 6 to 10 rounds wins the game.
What may have started as an enjoyable pastime of throwing stones over ice during a harsh northern European winter has evolved into a popular modern sport with its own world championships. The exact origins of the game are unclear. However, curling in its early days was played on frozen lochs and ponds, a pastime still enjoyed in some countries when weather permits, but all national and international competitive curling competitions now take place in indoor rinks with the condition of the ice carefully temperature controlled. The first recognized curling clubs were formed in Scotland, and during the 19th century the game was exported wherever Scots settled around the world in cold climates, most notably at that time in Canada, the USA, Sweden, Switzerland, Norway, and New Zealand. The first rules were drawn up in Scotland, and they were formally adopted in the rules in curling by the Grand Caledonian Curling Club, which was formed in Edinburgh in 1838 and became the sport's governing body. In 2016, the World Curling Federation celebrated its 50th anniversary. That year, a sweeping summit was arranged near Ottawa, Canada, to address the rules of sweeping. This resulted in one of the sport's most significant set of rule changes to date, following a season that challenged the conventions of how stones should be swept and what types of fabrics should be used on brushes. Let's take a closer look at the critical throwing motion discussed earlier. The image on the left isolates the thrower and breaks the motion down on a more microscopic level. The image on the right shows what this motion typically looks like during gameplay. As you can see, the player throwing the stone is in a lunge position as they release the curling stone, sending it in the direction of the house, or bullseye, located roughly 150 feet away.
Now we'll dive into some of the important biomechanics concepts that play a critical role in curling performance. First, we'll discuss friction. Friction is the resistance of motion of one object relative to the motion of another as they slide past each other. Friction plays a very important role in the curling movement of the stone across the pebbled surface. Between games, the ice is sprayed with droplets of water, which freeze to form microscopic bumps, which are essential to the curling action of the curling stone. The bottom of a curling stone resembles the bottom of a beer bottle in its concavity. Only a narrow ring of stone actually interacts with the ice. It was previously believed that the curling motion was due to a redistribution of friction. The curling stones tip forward slightly as they slide, which creates additional pressure and warms the ice, forming a thin film of water that acts as a lubricant. The lubricated surface reduces the coefficient of friction, thus reducing the friction in the front, which increases the friction in the back. Players can manipulate friction to improve performance. For example, pebbling and scratching the ice alters the curl trajectory of sliding stones. Manipulating this rough surface of the ice can lead to unprecedented control over the curl of the stone, because every time the stone encounters a pebble, it catches on it, and because ice is elastic, the pebble is deflected. One company took advantage of this and created a broom that has since been banned that scratched the ice rather than merely warming it. This offered the player unprecedented control over the curl of the stone. Furiously sweeping the ice directly in front of the stone can also improve performance by reducing the coefficient of friction, thus reducing the friction in front of the stone. This reduction of friction in the front of the stone increases the distance traveled by the stone.
Next, we'll discuss how rotational velocity plays into curling. Rotational velocity is the numerical expression of the amount of rotation that a spinning object goes per unit time. The stone is initially released with a clockwise, or right, or counterclockwise, left, direction. The curl arises partly from the reduced friction on the forward rotating side of the stone, which is the side that is spinning in the direction of the stone's overall movement, in comparison to the backward rotating side of the stone, which is the side that is spinning in the opposite direction of the overall movement of the stone. We'll show a picture of this on the next slide for clarity's sake. The greater rotational velocity on the forward rotating side leads to greater heat generation and therefore more melting of the ice. This creates an asymmetric coefficient of friction, such that the coefficient of friction, and therefore the frictional force, is less on the forward rotating side, and the stone will then curl in that direction. So, ultimately, a counterclockwise release results in a curl to the left, while a clockwise release results in a curl to the right. Performance improvement can thus be related to the orientation of stone release and the degree and speed of this angular acceleration, as opposed to the linear aspect of the acceleration, which will influence the curl of the stone. Also, sweeping on either the forward or backward side of the stone can either facilitate or hinder direction of the curl, as sweeping helps to reduce friction. So, as was mentioned on the previous slide, this is a picture of what the forward versus backward rotating sides are. The side spinning towards the line of motion is the forward rotating side, while the side spinning away from this line of motion is the backwards rotating side. Lastly, we will look at how the concept of work comes into play. Work is the measure of energy transfer that occurs when an object is moved over a distance by an external force. Forces can be broken down into both vertical and horizontal components. The horizontal component is directly responsible for the stone's displacement across the ice, while the vertical component does nothing. Thus, the stone is released with the player's arm parallel to the ground, and it is propelled forward by the sliding motion of the player's body alone, such that no pushing action is utilized. This ensures that force acting on the stone is mostly horizontal, affording the greatest amount of travel distance with the least amount of force. The use of any pushing action on the part of the player upon release of the stone would increase the likelihood of applying a greater vertical force. Any vertical component of the force would result in less work and therefore a shorter distance. So, more force is necessary to move the stone in the same distance when released from an angle above the horizontal. To maximize performance, it is thus essential that the player release the stone parallel to the surface of the ice.